Thank you. Bye. Good.
Hey, good afternoon. I'm Ron Okram. I'm the Acting Executive Director of the New York State Gaming Commission. I want to welcome everyone to today's program. This month, as many as you know, is Problem Gambling Awareness Month. The Responsible Play Partnership is working to educate the public on the issues of problem gambling and providing help to those who need it. The New York State Gaming Commission is part of the Responsible Play Partnership with OASIS and the New York Council on Problem Gambling. We believe that by working together, we can engage stakeholders through various ways to promote responsible gaming in New York. The turnout today reflects our strong partnership and strong commitment to this issue. Again, thank you for joining us today. But before we begin, let me go around the room and everybody introduce themselves so we know who's here.
Tim Pearson, Resorts World, New York City.
Christopher Jones, Resorts World, New York City.
Dave Miller, Tioga Downs and Vernon Downs Casino.
Jennifer Bird, New York State Office of Alcoholism and Substance Abuse Services.
Cliff Woolridge, Rivers.
Kyle Bond, Rivers.
Mary Paratori, Capital OTB.
Michelle Haddon, New York Council on Problem Gambling.
Dan Freed, Jake's 58.
Fred Maoney, New York Gaming Commission.
Carolyn Heatman, New York State Gaming Commission.
Scott McClear, New York State Gaming Commission.
Tom Annapolis, New York State Gaming Commission.
Jim Tuthill, New York State Gaming Commission.
We just had two other people join us. Your name?
Thank you. Christina Johnson, Prize Payments Unit.
Pat Tweed, Gaming Commission.
We've got Scott.
Scott Traskis, Gaming Commission.
Now I'd like to introduce Jim Maney of the New York Council on Problem Gambling. Jim.
Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody, for folks in different time zones, our guests from Canada. We are so pleased to be a part of this, to get everybody together here at the Gaming Commission. We really want to thank Carolyn for all her work in doing this and getting together, but really for everybody coming today on this issue that is very important to, I know, all of us. So we really appreciate everybody coming. We've got a lot of work to do. You know, the mission of the council is to raise the awareness of problem gambling in the state of New York, and so we appreciate all that's done by all of you here. Also, being part of the RPP, you know, you think about it from the council's perspective, we're involved with the New York Gaming Commission and the New York Office of Alcohol and Substance Abuse Services in our organization. We are very pleased to be a part of that. They're both state agencies, very important, very powerful, very productive state agencies, and we are a state not-for-profit. So even in that type of arrangement, it's unique. But I think the work that is being produced in a short period of time has been tremendous, and I think today's event actually shows how far we've come in this. We have new people at the table with us, more people doing the same thing that we've all been trying to do, especially during this month. So I thank you for that.
Dr. McCormick?
I'd like to introduce now, all the way from British Columbia, Canada, but before that she was from New Zealand, and before that she was from Ontario, Canada, and that's when I had to come sit up here. So I think there's a heck of a lot more that she has to offer, but I'd like to introduce Dr. Amanda.
Thank you very much. Thank you. No one hold the applause till after. We'll see how this goes. There's some copies here as well of the executive summary. Did you want to hand those out now or afterwards?
Yeah.
Yep, we'll just pass them around so everyone can kind of see what I'm talking about. So maybe we'll take a bunch there. Yeah, thank you. And then put some here. And I also have my business card I can give you after if you have any follow-up questions. So thank you very much for having me today. I think, there we go, presentation's up on the screen there. I'm very excited to be here and talk to you about the research that we've conducted. So I'm Amanda McCormick. I'm from the School of Criminology and Criminal Justice at the University of the Fraser Valley. So that's a university in British Columbia. It's about 45 minutes or so outside of Vancouver. We have a criminology program with about 500 undergraduate students, and then we have a Master's of Criminal Justice as well, which has about 15 students a year coming through our cohort. My other kind of line of work is with the Center for Public Safety and Criminal Justice Research, where I am a research associate, and that's where we conduct a lot of our research into problem gambling, as well as other kinds of more criminal justice focused research. And so I'll talk to you a little bit later in the presentation about where the this project came from, but that's the project, the center where we conduct all of our research, and our reports are all available online. So I'll give you the information about where to find that later on so you can download the reports if they're of interest to you. So I want to make this as useful as I can for everybody. So please, as I'm going through the presentation, if there's questions that you have, please don't hold them to the end. Just ask them as we go through. And I'm happy to take the conversation in whatever direction you would like to take it in at that point. And then, of course, I'm available for questions after, and I'll give you my card in case there's any follow-ups after that. All right, so I'm sure you're all aware of this, but problem gambling is an issue for about 4.2% of the population. So that's based on Schaefer and Hall's research that was conducted nationally. And so this is lifetime prevalence rates for problem gambling. We know that there's a couple of different strategies for how people can deal with problem gambling symptoms, but they're not very popular methods. So counseling uptake is one option for people who are experiencing problems or symptoms of problem gambling. But there's plenty of research, some of it cited here, that shows that counseling uptake is quite low for people who are experiencing symptoms of problem gambling. And we'll talk a little bit later about some strategies that we have to increase that. Another route that people take to try to deal with their symptoms of problem gambling is just to wait it out, just to kind of recover naturally. So it's basically an exercise of self-control. They decide to stop gambling and just take a break from casinos and just see if they can deal with the symptoms on their own without reaching out for any other sort of support. That works for some people, but only about a third of people who try that route are successful. So then we get to self-exclusion, which is a more common option now for a lot of people to take when they're trying to deal with symptoms of problem gambling, is to enroll in a self-exclusion program. So there has now been actually quite a bit of self-exclusion research. There was a study done, longitudinal study done by Nelson et al. About the Missouri program. Robert Ladouceur in Quebec has conducted a couple of longitudinal studies as well. Hayer and Meyer did a study, I believe it was in Germany. And then we have done 2 studies now looking at the program that the British Columbia Lottery Corporation operates in BC. And so I'll be talking in detail about one of those particular studies today. We know that the self-exclusion programs are used by people who would qualify as probable or definite pathological gamblers, or now known as people with a gambling disorder. And the program results from the different studies that have been conducted generally show high rates of success for people. And we'll go through some of those results and what success means as I take you through the results of our particular research. So just to contextualize a little bit for you, gambling in British Columbia, it's very similar to gambling that you would see elsewhere in North America. So about 75% of British Columbians report that they have gambled in the past year. About 3.3% of them were assessed at being either moderate or high risk for gambling problems according to the problem gambling inventory. So that is based on the BC problem gambling prevalence study that was conducted in 2014. So that's our most recent survey done of the province of British Columbia. BCLC has operated a province-wide voluntary self-exclusion program since 1998. So basically, if you sign up in one venue, you are excluded from all the gaming venues across British Columbia at once. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well with the results and the implications that that has. With the BCLC's voluntary self-exclusion program, they do not operate a lifetime exclusion. So the options that people have when they enroll start at 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years of exclusion. Counseling is not mandatory as part of this program. It's something that is presented to the person as they enroll in the self-exclusion. They're told about counseling. Just so you know, there's some important aspects of counseling access in British Columbia in that it is free for people to take. It's provided in a language of their choice, which is important because we have a lot of minorities that enroll in this program. It's provided at a location of your choice. So they will come to you. They'll even meet you in a car if you want to keep it very private. They can do different types of counseling as well. So individual counseling, group-based counseling. They can bring your family into the counseling. So they make it very flexible for people. So if you want to access counseling in British Columbia, it is not difficult to do so. People can also go into counseling and not go into the VSE, or they can choose to go into the VSE and take both those routes. So counseling is presented as an option, and people at the time of enrollment are asked whether or not they would like to give their name forward to a counselor who will then contact them. And usually that contact happens in about a week or so. They receive a phone call from the counseling service who sets them an appointment and takes it to the next step. And so I'll give you some of our results about how many people agreed to have their name forwarded, as well as how many people actually went that next step and met with a counselor. Once that information has been shared with the person who is enrolling, they then collect information that they enter into what's called the iTrack system. So this is basically where you're actually, I went through the enrollment just to see how this experience would work. So I'm sitting in the seat and they're talking to me, and then I start filling out the forms, and the whole time they actually have a camera that's taking photographs of me. So it's taking the different angles of my face, and I can't basically get away with misrepresenting my identity because it captures all the different ways that your facial structure is represented. And so that's basically what they say is it's a way to avoid you trying to change your identity to come into the casino, is by taking all these different angles so that they recognize you. They have a high degree of matching when you come into the casino. So that information is entered into the iTrack system, which again is shared across the entire province. So if you exclude in where I'm from, the Lower Mainland area, and then you drive up north to a casino, you're in the iTrack system there, so they can detect you if you come into the casino. They actually introduced the automated license plate recognition technology as well a couple of years ago. And so this is basically where you give your license plate information, and they record that into the system, and they have basically a database of what we call hot plates. So if you drive into a parking lot and you're captured by this camera, it basically checks your license plates against a list of these predefined license plates, and if yours is a match, then it notifies security that you are on the grounds. Possibly, it could be your partner, for instance, or your kid if they've taken your car, but they notify security, there's an alert sent out, and so they're on the lookout for you around to see if they can detect you in the premises of the casino. There are some challenges with using the system. For instance, in British Columbia, you can exclude from the gaming floor but still go into the restaurants or the shows as long as you're not on the gaming floor. And so it will still send that alert if your car is in the vicinity, but they can come and just make sure that you're not entering the actual gaming part and that you are restricting yourself to where the shows or the restaurants are happening. So as I mentioned, BCLC has had this program in place since 1998, but they had not ever looked at it to see how well is it actually working for the people that are entering into this program. So they came to us at the time in the School of Criminology and Criminal Justice. We had this BC Government Centre, so it received provincial government funding. It was the BC Centre for Social Responsibility, and so we looked at issues of social responsibility. So we did research and we provided resources like fact sheets and reports on a wide range of social behaviors, and some of that included gambling. We did projects on underage gambling, we looked at college gambling, we looked at online gambling as well, and then we were asked to do this evaluation study for the British Columbia Lottery Corporation. And so I'll take you through the methodologies of the two projects, but essentially that's where this first project came through, and by the end of the project, the centre was still in place, and so we published it under this BC Centre. But when we began the second study, we'd no longer received funding from the government. There was a whole bunch of cutbacks, and the centre basically did not survive. And so we brought it under our other research centre, which is the Centre for Public Safety and Criminal Justice Research. And that's important, I think, because I know I've been asked at different events about why is it that a Centre for Criminal Justice is doing this research. That's the reason why we're coming through that centre now. It's because it initiated out of this original Centre for Social Responsibility. And the same two people, Dr. Irwin Cohen, who is the principal investigator of this project, he was the director of the centre and is now the director of the other centre. I was the research director with the centre, and I'm a research associate with the Centre for Public Safety. So that's where you'll find all the reports posted now. Any questions so far? I tend to go really quickly. Good? Okay. All right, so we have completed 2 longitudinal studies. The first study actually began with us conducting focus groups with staff. So this included people who administered the program, people who did the enrollments of the program, people who were doing the online aspects. They did not have a self-exclusion program at that time online, but they were the people that were trying to manage the system and do the sign-ups and make sure the information was being shared. So we conducted focus groups to get a sense of what people thought about this program. We went into it thinking that we were going to get actually a lot of resistance to the program, and we were surprised and pleased to find that people actually really liked the program. They found that there were some challenges and things that could be improved, but overall they thought it was a good program. They were happy that they had a resource that they could refer problem gamblers to, because otherwise they didn't have a lot of options. They could tell them to go to counseling, but there wasn't really any weight behind that. They couldn't force them to do that. They felt like they have these people who were going through emotional turmoil. You know, they just had a big loss, and there was not a lot that they could do for them. So having this program there to be able to recommend them, give self-exclusion a try, was actually a very helpful process for them. We then, from that point, we developed some questions around the self-exclusion process and the program itself, and then we developed our interviews. So what we ended up doing is recruiting people at the time that they were enrolling. And this sounds a little bit difficult to do. Again, it's a very emotionally emotional time for these people as they're going through the enrollment. But what we discovered through talking to security staff is that when they were doing the enrollments, there was a period of time where they actually left the room to go and photocopy the person's identity. And so that person was left by themselves for 5 to 10 minutes while that happened, basically stewing over the choice that they had made. So this was really awkward. Sometimes they would come back and the person had changed their mind. They had 5 minutes to think about it. They thought, you know what? I'm worried about this, and so they backed out of the program. So we found that that was a really good time for us to promote the study that we were doing. So what happened is the security staff actually put on a video. So we created a recruitment video with 2 of the principal investigators talking about the importance of participating in this research. So the video played while the security was out of the room doing the identity photocopying, and then when they came back in, they asked them, do you want to consent to participate in the research project? If they said yes, or if they wanted to think about it, they would give them a consent form, have them fill out the information. They could either take it home with them and mail it directly, or most people just gave the consent form right back to security staff, who then put it in an envelope and mailed it directly to us at the university. So they knew that the person had consented to do the study, but they didn't actually know what information they shared with us about it. It was completely out of their hands at that point, and the university, the Fraser Valley, took over the process once we received that consent form. So we had 169 people in the first study. It took us about a year and a half to recruit that many people. And then we offered them 4 interviews that were conducted every 6 months. So the first interview was conducted within a month of them signing up. Usually it was in about 2 weeks or so, but we capped it at a month. And then we called them 6 months later, 6 months later, 6 months later, and we got a sense of how is the program working for you so far. We had a lot of people drop off during that first study. I think the end of the time for interview was about 46 people. But our second study, I'll go through the results there, we had much lower attrition rates, much higher response rates. So we did those 4 interviews, and then we also got the enrollment numbers on a monthly basis from BCLC about how many people are signing up for the BSc program in any given month, so that we knew what proportion of those people were participating in our study. And so it looked like about 15% or so of the people who were signing up for the self-exclusion were participating in our research. Unfortunately, we couldn't draw any direct comparisons between the people in our study and the people in the larger program, because BCLC didn't have the right to share the information about the demographics of those people. So that's something that we're working forward on with our third study, which I'll tell you about in just a moment. So after we finished that study, BCLC took our recommendations. They implemented the jackpot rule, which I understand a lot of other places have now implemented, and they made a few other changes as well. And then they said, come back. We want you to come back. We want you to do this research again. And so we set up a similar methodology to do the study again, longitudinal, following them over a period of time, doing these telephone interviews. So with the second study, I don't know if it's because we increased the amount of money we were paying people or because people had heard about our project, but we had anticipated, again, it would take us about 18 months to recruit our sample. We recruited more people than we thought in less time than we thought we would. So we actually received about 476 consent forms in 8 months of recruitment, which was really, really impressive. When we contacted those people, some people said, I don't remember signing up for your program, and they hung up the phone. Some people thought that we were a counselor, so they withdrew their name, or we couldn't reach those people. But overall, we got 326 people in that first study, and then I think it was 276 continued on through the end of the study. So we had about a 73% follow-up rate for the duration of the study, which is really critical in research, because the people who drop out are more often the people who struggle with the program. So the fact that we had low dropout numbers will allow us to know more about the success of the program. In this study, we suggested to BCLC it would be good to know more about why people are breaching, why people are violating the program. We had detected in study 1, actually, it was a small number of these chronic violators who multiple times a day were trying to re-enter the casino even while they were under their exclusion agreement. So it was a very small proportion. I think it was about 10% of the overall sample of people who breached their agreements, but these people were persistent. And these are the people that were really draining the resources of the program, because trying to detect them was becoming very difficult. These are people who would go to multiple casinos in a single day trying to get access. So if they were caught at one, in BC, there's a lot of casinos in a small area in the Lower Mainland, they would just drive down the road and go to a second one and try to enter there. So they were putting a lot of pressure on the program's resources. So we made some recommendations around that were not accepted, which I can talk about a little bit later. So in this second study, then we said, let's talk to these people and let's get more of an understanding about what is motivating them to try to get back into the casino, because knowing what triggers them might help us to make some recommendations around prevention opportunities. So we did that, and then we also said, let's look at a sample of people who are gamblers in British Columbia, but who have never enrolled in the self-exclusion program before, because that might help us to understand some of the differences of which people are more likely to use self-exclusion, and then BCLC could potentially use that to change their marketing of the program to target it more towards people who could benefit from the program, but who have never been enrolled in the program before. So in the final summer of our project 2, they put out an online survey with their exchange group. This is people who have agreed previously to participate in research that is being conducted by BCLC. So they put out a survey. Within about 2 weeks, they had 350 responses. And so we were able to draw some comparisons between what we call a VSE sample and the non-VSE sample. And then again, we compared to the enrollment numbers to get a sense of, are we recruiting a higher proportion of people? It was still about 15% of the overall population. So that tells us that probably more people were actually responding to the Visa gift cards that we gave them. This is why we recruited much faster. Just to talk about that briefly as well. So every time that people did an interview with us, we would send them, in the second study, a $50 Visa gift card directly to their house in a white envelope that didn't have any sort of university signage or anything like that. It was just a plain white envelope with the card. Most people got it and used it. Some people didn't get it, and we had to send them a second one, which we then couriered to make sure that they did get it. But for the most part, people were given $50 for the first interview, $50 for the second, $50 if they did the violator interview, and then $100 to keep them going all the way through to time 3. And so that seemed to work really well at keeping people involved in that, in the surveys. We are just about to embark on our 3rd evaluation study, so BCLC has asked us to come back in again. We are adding some new components that have never been done before in self-exclusion research, that have not been done by us in our research. One of the things we're adding on is a diary component. So basically what we're going to do is, for a subset of the people who we're interviewing, we are offering them the chance to do a weekly diary check-in online. So they're basically going to go online once a week. We're going to ask them to fill out information about their emotional well-being, their gambling urges. How are you feeling? Are you thinking about gambling? We're going to measure their problem gambling severity index score as well. And then we're going to get a sense of whether or not they have attempted to violate their agreement yet at that point. So we can get a more finite measure of the changes people go through after enrollment. So that's one additional component. We're also introducing what we call psychometric subscales. So these are basically different screens we can use to get a better sense of who these people are, and that will help us to understand better which people are more successful in the program versus which people are more of the chronic breachers or people who are kind of in between. So we'll get a better sense of what, again, may be motivating some of these people to breach. We are also going to be, for the first time ever, doing an online version, because BCLC has now introduced an online self-exclusion program, so people can click onto a site which excludes them instantly. And so we're going to be doing the same surveys and telephone interviews with these individuals to find out what their experiences have been like going with that route. So those are the main components. I think there's one more that I'm missing, but it might come back to me. So we're just about to start that study, and we'll be collecting data again over the 3 different periods going forward. Okay, so the methodology I've already pretty much gone over. We're going to focus now on the results of the most recent study, which was out in 2017. And again, all of our reports are on our website, so if you want to read more details about the project, then you can find it on our website. So essentially, recruiting people at the time of enrollment, we interviewed them on the telephone about 1 month, usually 2 weeks, but within 1 month of their enrollment. That was important for us to get a sense of how are they still reacting to the fact that they've made this enrollment decision. If it was longer than a month, we made the decision that they're probably too far into the enrollment at that point. Things might have changed very much from when they were first enrolling in terms of their problem gambling symptoms, for instance. So that's why we made that cutoff. So we did telephone interviews. The first one was looking a lot at background characteristics. What was your gambling like before you got into the program? So how often were you going? How much were you spending? What were the games that you were playing? How else have you tried to stop gambling in the past, if you have? We also got a sense of just their general demographics. We included some screens for things like depression and anxiety and stress. And then we also talked about what their enrollment experience was like. So how do they perceive the enrollment to go? Oh, and then second and third interviews were about their experiences in the program. So here you can see again, we had 326 people at time 1. We included 40 people for the violator subsample. That was nearly everybody who reported that they had breached. So 6 months after the program, the study began, we called them and we did our time to interview. How are things going so far? What's been happening for you? Are you gambling at all? Have you tried to breach your agreement? If they said, yes, I've tried, whether or not they were successful, we said, would you like to do another interview with us where we talk about your motivations? And so I think we had 44 people who were invited and 40 said, yes, I'll do that interview. And then it was very much a tell me how you feel kind of interview, so a qualitative interview. With the non-BSE sample, you can see we pulled that in summer of 2015, and we were really looking for some comparison data around demographics, around gambling history, and around their PGSI scores. So some of the main criteria for how we were trying to understand which people go into the BSE and which people don't. All right, so I'm going to touch on these 3 different things as I go through the results of our second study. But I just wanted to point out, this was a publication by Williams in 2007. He looked at gambling VSE programs that were in operation across Canada and said that whenever you're doing an assessment of how well self-exclusion is working, these are 3 of the things that you need to measure. You need to look at how many people are signing up for the program. So out of the pool of people who could potentially benefit from self-exclusion, how many of them are you actually recruiting into your program? They also said you should look at the non-violation rates, basically how many people are not attempting to get back into the casino, so how many people are successful, as they would term it in the program, one measure of success, and then overall gambling behavior. So we know that self-exclusion programs do not target all gambling. In British Columbia, it's only the gaming that occurs in casinos, in horse tracks that have the slot machines, and in commercial gaming halls. We actually don't have the lottery as part of our self-exclusion. I believe you do in New York. It's when you're excluded from everything, but you are not excluded from the lottery and the scratch and win tickets and all that kind of stuff in British Columbia. So that's one of the things we wanted to measure is how does your formal gambling change as compared to the broader gambling that is outside the context of the self-exclusion program. So I'll talk about utilization rates first, and then we'll get into the other 2 questions as we go throughout. Any questions? Yeah.
Sorry. I was just going to ask, what made you determine not to include lottery in the self-exclusion?
That was a BCLC decision, so I don't know the answer to that question. I think it's something that they just weren't sure how they would control, because people, when they're buying lottery tickets, they don't have to show ID. And I think just expanding the program to I don't know how many we have, how many terminals that sell this kind of thing, but expanding the program there would maybe make it untenable for them. So that would be my best guess. Yeah. Any other questions that I can or cannot answer for you? I will do my best. I'm not from industry though, so we'll see how it goes. All right, so I'm going to focus on the findings from Study 2, but again, some of these findings are consistent with Study 1, and both reports are available on our website. So in the Williams study, they looked at, again, self-exclusion across Canada and found that there was a range of utilization from about 0.6% of the population to 7% of the population. So we did some fancy numbers to try to figure out how many people in BC could potentially benefit from this program. So, So looking at the problem gambling prevalence study, again, I think it was 3.4% of the population could be considered at moderate or high risk for problem gambling. So we calculated that to about 125,000 people in BC who could benefit from enrolling in the program. You saw on the slide there, and it will come back, that in any given month, there's about 6,700 people who are both in the land-based exclusion as well as the online exclusion. So when you exclude on land, you're excluded also from playnow.com, so you can't do any sort of formal gambling that comes under the purview of BCLC. If you exclude online, you only exclude online. You don't exclude from the land-based casinos. So an average about 6,700 per month are in both of those programs, and so we calculated that to be about a 5% utilization rate. So at the upper end then of what the utilization kind of scale was. But definitely there's more room to grow there for the program. There's more people that they could be pulling in. And so we made some recommendations later in the report about potential recruitment and marketing of the program to get more people into it. Okay, I don't know what we missed there. Yep, it looked like a blank slide in mine, so hopefully it's fine. Okay, so we looked at program awareness as one of our first results. So how did you find out about the program? And what we found is that about 3/4 of people said, I heard about it through casino marketing. The next most common answer was from a fellow gambler who told them about the program, and that was 39%. So people were more than twice as likely to report that they heard about the program through some form of casino marketing. So that includes things like posters that are around the casino. They have those little lines that pop up when you're gambling on the machine as well, like letting you know about the VSE program. There's also some marketing that occurs in private spaces. So if you're going to the bathroom, for instance, if you're a woman, if you're in the stall, you shut the door, there's advertisements on the back of the door, and they would put the VSE advertisements up there as well, so you have a chance to read about the program in privacy. They also have responsible gambling booths that are set up in some, not all of the casinos across British Columbia, and that's where GameSense advisors are located, and they also have information about the program. They can tell you about it, and then they have brochures that they can distribute to people as well. So there's many different ways that people can find out when they're in the casino or commercial gaming hall about the program. And then, of course, there's the website that you can visit as well. So casino marketing was the most common, but there still was a gap between when people first heard about the program and when they first enrolled in the program. And I would say that's pretty consistent with just the general addictions literature. You first find out that there's a program, but it takes you a while to realize that that program is actually right for you. And so part of the challenge was people not recognizing that they had a problem with gambling, or people knowing that they had a problem but they didn't realize how bad of a problem it was becoming for them. So they heard about the program, but it took them 6 months to a year or so before they actually utilized the program. So I think it was only about 15% of people heard about the program and immediately enrolled in the program. And one of the things we'd like to do is to look at success rates based on whether you enroll immediately or whether you take the time to think about it and enroll maybe 6 months after you first heard. Do they have different effects on the success of the program, how it works for you? Another thing that's important to note is that about 3/4 of our sample were what we call repeat enrollers. So they have used self-exclusion in the past, it has worked for them, and they have enrolled in the program again. So interestingly enough, I compared our sample from the most recent study to the people that we had in the first study, and I think we had 4 names that were identical. Everybody else was new. But they're not new to the program itself. They are using it, it's working, they're signing up again. One of the things we didn't expect, but we found out from the second study, is that some people use self-exclusion as a budgeting tool. So they tell us, because there's a 6-month enrollment, they will sign up, midway through, maybe around the summertime or so, and they will save up all the money they would have spent on gambling in order to buy Christmas presents for their family. Or maybe they'll sign up for a year and they'll save that money towards a down payment on a house or a trip for their family. And then once they've made that payment, they go back to gambling again. So for these individuals, and many of them, we screened them, we knew it was true, they did not have a problem with gambling. They're using it solely for budgeting purposes. So that was a really interesting angle of the program that we had never thought about. So it could be an interesting way to market the program going forward. If you want to save a little cash before Christmas, sign up for 6 months and see how it goes. And so that's also why I think we had some repeat enrollers, because they do this every year and it's become a habit for them. Okay, so here's just a quick breakdown of the people who were in the VSE study versus the non-VSE study. There were some differences in the demographics, but actually, and I don't have it up here, the key differences were obviously between the gambling scores. So people who were in the VSE program gambled much more frequently, most of them saying that they gambled in the last week, several times a week. As compared to the non-VSE, they gambled less frequently. The VSE people spent more money when they were gambling compared to the non-VSE sample. And then we compared them on the PGSI, the Problem Gambling Severity Index. And what we found is that the VSE sample were in the problem gambling range. Their score was around a 12, whereas the non-VSE sample was about a 1.5. So we're getting the right people, it seems, into the self-exclusion program, because the people who have scored in the high range for problem gambling are the ones that are signing up for the program. But we were surprised to find that there were a handful of people in our non-VSE sample who scored in the problem gambling range as well. Not a lot of them, but a few of them. So we're repeating this in our third study, and we're hoping to get a larger sample size so we can get a sense of these people who could benefit from the program but are not enrolled in the program. What is preventing them from going into the program? They're scoring as if they could benefit from it, but maybe they're not aware that they actually have this severe level of gambling. And so that's something that, again, we could market differently to help recruit those people into the program, to help them recognize that it could work for them. We looked at some basic descriptive information about how long people are signing up for. So basically it was split evenly between 6 months, 1 year, and the 3-year. The 2-year option is really unpopular for some reason. It was the same in our first study, but the other options seem to be equally of interest to people. And of note, it was not tied to success in the program. So people who are in for 6 months are just as successful as people who are in for 3 years. And that probably depends, again, on the motivation for why you're enrolling in the program. Because if you're doing the 6 months for budgeting, you're probably probably going to be very successful. As successful as somebody who's done the program, twice before, and now they're in for their third 3-year enrollment, because that's what they do instead of lifetime. They just continue to re-enroll every single time that they're up. Some of them take a small break and go back to gambling and then sign up again once they realize they're losing control. So it's kind of a safety net for those individuals to come back into the program. So there's a lot of data here. Basically, everything is really coming up at the top level here when it comes to rating of enrollment experience. So we asked a variety of questions around who did your enrollment? Was it a security staff? Was it a game sense advisor, or was it them doing it in combination? And then what were the ratings of each individual on things like how sensitive were they to your needs? How well did they explain the program to you? How respectful were they of your situation? And everybody came out in the 95%. People were very, very satisfied with the experience that they had enrolling. So this is important to know because one of the things that when we did with our focus groups in the first study from security, they were saying, well, we don't know, if we're doing a good job. Are we providing the right kind of environment for these individuals? They're going through such a crisis and we don't know if we're the best people to be doing this enrollment. They actually created something called appropriate response training for security that helped them to navigate this process. And it turns out that they are doing an excellent job, that people feel very comfortable with them. You can see across the board, there was no differences anywhere in terms of satisfaction levels, depending on whether they went through with security alone, with a game sense advisor, or with both. People were equally happy regardless of which situation they were in. The only difference, and we'll get to that in a moment, is in terms of counseling uptake. So that's the only place where we found a different result. Overall, counseling was very low. About a fifth of people in our study accessed counseling. So it is a challenge. We talked after the first study about making a recommendation that counseling be a required component, as it is in other jurisdictions, where if you sign up for self-exclusion, you must also agree to access counseling before you're allowed back into the casinos. And what we heard from people in the first study is, if you had counseling as a mandatory component, I would never have signed up for self-exclusion before. And we think that's one of the reasons why self-exclusion is at the higher end of the utilization rates in BC, is people don't feel that added pressure to go and access counseling. Even though it's recommended, even though we know that there are benefits that it can help you succeed, people are not uptaking counseling. And there's a variety of reasons why that might be. Yes, sir?
The financial impact, did they indicate that finances would have an impact on whether they sought counseling?
It's free in BC, so for them. But that's a great question, because in our first study we asked people about what do you know about counseling, and people thought in some cases that they would have to pay for it. They didn't understand it was free for them, and you're right, in some cases that was preventing them from accessing it. And then there were other reasons, I don't recall if I have them in here or not, but other reasons included, it's just, I want to deal with it on my own. I don't want to talk to somebody. I don't have the time for counseling. They didn't realize it would be offered in other languages. They thought they had to speak English to access counseling when that's not the case. And so in the first study, we made a number of recommendations around better marketing of the aspects of the counseling program. And in the second study, it seems like many more people were familiar with those aspects of it. Still, uptake is still low overall. And so we asked some questions around, we were not assessing the counseling side of things. There's another group that's doing that research, so we limited the questions that we asked about it. People who were in counseling enjoyed it. They said that they liked the different ways that it was operated. They liked the counselor that they were working with for the most part. They found it helpful. But the people who didn't access counseling, again, they just didn't want to. They didn't want to open themselves up to that situation. So they need to be encouraged to do so, but not forced to do so. Is basically the conclusion of our research. So people who were in counseling were more likely to recognize that they did have a problem with gambling. We still had people signing up for self-exclusion scoring at like 14 out of the scale. The cutoff for problem gambling is an 8. And they're saying, oh, I don't have a problem with gambling. I'm fine. I can manage it. And these are the people that are trying to do it on their own without connecting with counseling. So that's a bit of a challenge there. People who didn't do counseling, they prefer to use, as I said, either their own self-control, or they went to an informal social support network. So your family and your friends. Interestingly, in the first study, there were a number of people who didn't tell anybody about the fact that they were excluding in the program. Whereas in the second study, there was a larger proportion of people who said that they signed up because a friend signed up and they wanted to support them. And it turns out they also had a gambling problem and benefited from that. So people were connecting with others much more effectively in the second study to provide that kind of support network. And then we asked other people about alternatives to counseling. There were some people that were taking Gamblers Anonymous programs. There were some people, there wasn't much access to online counseling. So mostly they were just doing it based on their own kind of self-guided practice. We're going to look at mindfulness as well in our next study, because that's something a lot of people are using these days. Okay, so here's where we did find the one difference when the GSAs were present in the room at enrollment. So overall, we had low consent rates in terms of, yes, you can forward my name to a counselor. So about a third of the sample consented, and of those people, about half of the people that said, yes, forward my name, half of those people then access counseling. And you can see that when the GSAs, the game sense advisors, were present, people were significantly more likely to say, yes, forward my name to counseling, and significantly more likely to actually go and access that counseling. So that was interesting to us because both the security staff and the game sense advisors present counseling options. They both go through it. They tell them a little bit about the program. They say it's free to you. Do you want me to send your name forward to a counselor? So they're giving the same information. But in talking with GSAs afterwards, I went to a conference where some of them were present, they said that the way that they present counseling is not as counseling. They don't say, would you like me to put your name forward to a counselor? They say, would you like to talk to somebody about what you're going through? There's people that can help you as you're navigating this process, who can give you advice. Would you like to talk to those people? So in a way, they're kind of tricking them into it a little bit. But of course, once the counselor contacts the person, they have full right to say, no, I'm not interested at that point. So that might be one of the reasons why GSAs had kind of found a better way to present the counseling option, and they were getting higher uptake as a consequence of that. Just of note, one of the things that we're thinking of doing as kind of a sub-study to our next round of research is an opt-out option for counseling. So rather than saying, would you like me to put your name forward, we're going to try putting their name forward and having the person opt out when the counselor contacts them. So it's still not mandatory, but we know the research suggests that more people are going to go to counseling if they have to opt out than they are to opt in. So hopefully you can look forward to those results at some point in the future. Okay, so here we can see that the people who accessed counseling had a significantly higher score on the Problem Gambling Severity Index at the time 1 interview. So again, the cutoff for problem gambling, or for high levels of problem gambling, is an 8. So people who were accessing counseling were twice as high as that cutoff score. The people who weren't accessing counseling, they were still in the problem gambling range as well, but they were at a lower score to start with. Then we looked at their PGSI scores at time 2, and we found that they had both reduced substantially. So this was interesting because it's telling us that the people who are really struggling with their problem gambling are seeing positive effects from counseling and that their rates are going down, but the rates are also going down for people who are doing it on their own. So there's more to be found out about the nature of this counseling effect and how well, who it works for one, and then how well it's working for them. We also, interestingly, found that when you're looking at, and I'm sorry, I flip back and forth between violations, which was the term we used to use, and breaches, which is the term we now use, we actually found that a higher proportion of people who were taking counseling were the people that were breaching. And what we think might be going on there is that as you're going through counseling, you're raising all these difficult emotional issues that might trigger you to go back to the casino to try to gamble away, distract yourself or gamble away your problems. And so that may be what's happening here. It could just be, of course, because they're also starting out with higher problem gambling scores, and so therefore they feel more urges to gamble. We don't think it's counseling's fault. It's a process that people expect as they're going through recovery to have these kind of relapse moments. So just looking now at the PGSI score, so I've mentioned them a few times now. Here's what they looked like at time 1. So 3/4 of the sample were at or exceeded the cutoff for problem gambling, which is an 8. This is a scale that has, how many items is it now? I think it's 12 items, and there's 0 to 3 scale. So it's a possible score of 27, and we had some people that were right up there. But overall, the average score, as I think I have it on the next slide here. Nope, I don't. Average score was a 12.1. And you can see that 74% were in the problem gambling and 15% were in the moderate risk. There were some people at the lower end of the scale, so a much smaller subset of our population. They were people who, in some cases, as I mentioned already, signed up because a friend or a family member signed up, so they didn't have a gambling problem but wanted to provide support to somebody who did. Or these were people who have been in the program now several times. It's a lifelong thing for them. As soon as their exclusion is up, they re-enroll. So when we interviewed them, they didn't have a gambling problem because it had already been effectively managed from the program. Those were the most common 2 explanations. Here you can see the effects of the program on PGSI scores. So at time 1, they were, in this case, it was a subsample because we only looked at the people who went all the way through to time 3. So they were above 14. By time 2, they had dropped significantly down to around a 4. So somewhere in that first 6 months of being enrolled in self-exclusion, you are no longer experiencing these high levels of problem gambling symptoms. Now, we are attributing this back to the program. It was the same whether or not we were looking at people in counseling or people not in counseling. It seems to be simply that taking that step away from the environment of formal gambling is helping these people to get control over their symptoms of problem gambling. They continue to drop between time 2 and time 3, but it was not a significant drop. It just was kind of more of a sustained finding here. We also found that some of those people who we talked to them at time 2 and everyone was still excluded. By time 3, some of them, their exclusions had ended if they only did 6 months and they hadn't re-upped. So some of those people were going back to gambling, and we saw that their PGSI scores by time 3 were actually starting to increase again. So we're attributing this back to the program's effects then, that they have an instant effect. Well, instant within the first 6 months. This is one of the reasons why we are now doing the diary part of the project. We want to know where in that first 3 months are we seeing this? Is it effectively immediate, or is it happening over a month or 2 months or so? How long does it take before you see these drops? And we're also going to be looking at emotional states as well and how they're impacted. This is, again, a very wordy chart. Basically, it just shows if you're looking at the 12 different items that make up the PGSI, you can see where they were scoring in terms of what were some of the more common symptoms and what were some of the least common symptoms. So felt you might have a problem with gambling was one of the most endorsed items, whereas at the other end of it, losing time or stealing money to gamble was not very common. This chart is in the report if you want to go through it more. I don't think it's in the executive summary. All right, so something that we've done since the report was released is look to see about different types of gambling activities that people might have been participating in during their exclusion and whether or not that had an effect on the PGSI score. So if you remember again, when you're excluded from a range of formal gambling that is under the control of BCLC. But there are other ways that people can continue to gamble, including scratch and wins in the lottery. People can go, obviously, to a house game. They can go online to another source that is not playnow.com. So we call all of these things informal gambling, just because they're outside the control of the formal control of the program. And then people can completely abstain from gambling as well. And I'll go through the breakdown of the proportion of people that did each in just a moment. Well, what we wanted to know is people who abstain compared to people who informally gamble, compared to people who try to breach the agreement, what are the effects on the PGSI scores and the reductions that they are seeing? We checked it against demographics. There was no differences in terms of the genders, the ethnicities, the age groups, or anything like that. But what we did find is that when you're comparing the breachers to the other two groups, obviously the breachers saw less of an impact from the program. So they saw a difference of about 5 points between time 1 and time 2. So that's the extent to which their PGSI scores had dropped, only by about 5 points. When we looked at the informal gamblers and the abstainers, they were basically identical. So that was really interesting to us. People who abstained completely saw a drop of about 10 points from time 1 to time 2. People who continued to gamble outside of the ways that BCLC controls the program, they saw a drop of about 9. So there are some people that continue to gamble, whether it's online, whether it's through scratch and wins, who are not re-triggering the symptoms of problem gambling. So our next step is trying to find out more about who those people are who can do this kind of controlled gambling, because obviously when you're in counseling, in some counseling programs, they tell you it's abstinence or nothing, but that doesn't necessarily seem to be the case here. There are some people that can continue to gamble in safe ways and not re-trigger their symptoms. Okay, so time 1 gambling behavior. So now we're looking at people as they come into the program. What did they report their regular gambling to be right before they enrolled? So 74% of them were gambling weekly or multiple times a week. Most of them were on slot machines. That's probably not a surprise to anybody in the room. I think it was the last month, they visited an average of 3 venues. They gambled a median. We had to do the median because some people had gambled quite a lot, and so it pulled our average off. They put a median of $300 at risk, and they played on average for about 4 hours. This is the land-based statistics. We also have the online ones, but that was a very small subsample of our overall population. While they were excluded, very few people completely abstained. So you can see, I think this will work. Nope, okay. The first chart here is 6 months into the program, so our time to interview. We asked how many of you have gambled in any sort of way, and 87% of people said, I've done some type of gambling. So only 13% of people at that point said that they had completely stopped from gambling, and that is actually lower than it was in our first study, where it was about a third. Then at time 3, it's about 17% of people. So it's a very small group of people who completely abstain. But then again, it's also a small group of people who breach. So you can see at the time too, we had about just over the 15% line there. So at 6 months in, only 15% of people had tried to breach their agreement by re-entering the casino. So most people then are doing gambling activities that are outside the control of the program. And in most cases, I'll give you the answer, it's the lotto, it's the scratch and win. Disappeared again. And then you can see it continues to increase a little bit as we get closer towards the time 3 interview. This is again a subset of people who did all 3 of the interviews. So it's not the entire sample. But that detail is in our report as well. Here, I'll flip it over. Okay, there we go. So by the time we got to time 3, it was still only just over, I think it was 22%. So not a lot of people who were breaching. One of the reasons, we couldn't control for this, but we asked people about motivations for not breaching. One of the main reasons was the jackpot rule. Since that was implemented from the first study into the second, people are saying if I can't go to the casino and win, then why am I bothering to go to the casino? So that seemed to be a good factor in their decision to not try to breach the agreement. And there's other reasons I'll give you in now. Okay, we looked at the sample who had breached at time 2. So 97% of people who had tried to breach had gotten into the casino at least one time. That's where BCLC is having, and not BCLC alone, other programs have this issue too. That's where one of the main challenges is with detecting people as they present at the casino, recognizing that they are an excluded gambler. So 97% of people got in at least one time. On the other hand, because people are usually trying this more than once, just under half said that they had been caught at least one time in the last 6 months. So it's kind of hit or miss for them. They go, it's a 50-50 shot some days. Am I going to get in or am I going to get detected? So for them, some of them, then it's worth it to keep on trying because they know that it's likely that they may get caught, but also likely that they may not. We asked about how they tried to avoid being caught, and the most common way that people did so wasn't stuffing their cheeks or wearing a baseball cap. Very few people tried to fool the facial recognition technology. They just said, I'm just going to go to a different casino. And that, again, was most common in the Lower Mainland, where we have a collection of different casinos. There's 17 across the province, but a large proportion of them are in the Lower Mainland. So they could easily just go to a casino where the dealer wouldn't recognize them or the front doorman wouldn't recognize them and get in that way. If you think about it, again, it's 6,700 people in the program. About 4,000 of them are in the land-based version. That's 4,000 people that a security guard has to be on the lookout for, or security staff has to be on the lookout for. That's just not tenable. So, there's some strategies that we make at the end, some recommendations around how to make that a little bit easier for them. But that does mean that when you go to a different casino, it's pretty easy then to try to get in without being detected. We also don't do mandatory ID checks at the door, so that's a factor in that. Here are some of the reasons for why people told us that they were breaching. So about 80% of them, not surprisingly, simply felt the urge to gamble. They felt like they needed to gamble, so they went back to the casino and did so. About 3/4 said that they were bored. And then 70% said, I know there's no penalty. Now, your program is, I think, like ours in terms of we have penalties on the books for if you get caught as a breacher. So some of the things people are informed about if they get caught breaching are they can have a fine levied against them. They can be charged with trespassing and escorted off the premises. But beyond that, there's not much. Those things were basically put in place to create fear in people not to breach the program. But people know, because they talk with each other, that when they get caught, the most that ever happens is you're reminded about the program and escorted off the premises. So some of the people feel like the program doesn't have much teeth to it because we don't ever do anything to give you a consequence. Going back to the focus groups from the first study, one of the reasons for that is because security staff feel like this is very much a population who is struggling. They're struggling emotionally, they're struggling with mental health challenges, and so fining them or punishing them with trespassing charge just isn't in the best interest of either the person or the program as a whole. So we've recommended some other strategies to try to get around this problem that does not focus on punishing the person for making the decision to go back into the casino because they have an urge to gamble. You can also see that 62% said that they knew that there wasn't any real method of detection, and so they weren't really fearful about getting caught. Of course, this is tied back to problem gambling symptoms as well. People who are in the higher range of problem gambling severity are the people who are experiencing the urges to gamble, and those are the people that are trying to get back into the casino for the most part. And I say casino because that's the bulk of where the research was, not so much in the community gaming centers, bingo halls. So about half of the people who were in the problem gambling subgroup tried to breach at one point, whereas only 15% of people who were in the moderate and lower numbers for the other two groups tried to breach. So it's obviously then tied back to the problem gambling symptoms that they're experiencing. And here again, you can just see the average PGSI scores. There was no difference at time 1 between people who ended up breaching and not. But as you can see, as we get to time 2 and time 3, the people who didn't breach, they had successfully reduced their problem gambling symptoms right down to the really low levels. Whereas the people who continued to try breaching were people who at time 2 were still in the high risk for problem gambling symptoms, and time 3 were in the moderate risk group. So there is a correlation there between breaches and problem gambling severity scores. That probably doesn't surprise anybody. Qualitative perspective. So we talked to people, again, in depth about their triggers, what were their motivations for why they tried to re-enter the casino. A lot of people said, I was out for a night with my friends, and they wanted to go to the casino, and who was I to tell them no? Or I didn't want to tell them I was in the program, so I thought I would just take a shot at it and see if I could get in. So the peer pressure was a big factor. Some of them said it's, my girlfriend wanted to go out for the night, and I didn't want to disappoint her, so I went to the casino with her, and I breached. Some people said it's purely for money, even though they knew they couldn't win the jackpot, and there aren't really any great strategies for getting around that, because obviously those big wins are recorded, there's cameras everywhere, so they can't get a friend to go and claim the win, for instance, but they know that they can get small wins, and they can make small amounts of money, and if they make enough small wins, then they'll be okay. So some of them tried to strategize that way. And then for some of them, they just said, I just wanted to see if I would get caught. It's another gamble. Right? It's another gamble. I just want to gamble and see, can I get into the casino or not? So they just wanted to test the system. As I mentioned, some people changed venues to avoid detection. They went to a different gaming venue. Not very many people changed their game. It's an addiction for many of these people, so it's not so simple to say, I usually do slots, but I'm going to play craps instead. It's just not the way that it transfers. And then many of them said, if they just did ID checks at the door, that would deter me, because then I knew that my chances of getting in would be very, very small, and I wouldn't bother trying at all. For the people who did not try to breach, we asked them, what are some of the reasons why you didn't? A lot of them said, I'm just controlling my urges right now. It's self-control, and if I try to breach it, I've violated my own sense of trust. I've violated my own promise to myself that I wouldn't go into the casino again. But then also the jackpot rule was a major factor for a lot of people. If they know they can't make a big win, it's not going to solve all their financial issues then, so why bother going and spending more money? And then people focused as well in this group on the negative outcomes. I fear that if I go back, I'm just going to re-trigger, I'm going to have another big loss, or I'm going to go back to my problem gambling. And so they thought about those negative outcomes and used that to deter themselves from trying to reach their agreement. Okay, getting towards the end of the results. So we asked people at each stage of the interview how many people were satisfied with the program and how many people would recommend it. What we found at the time 2 interview is that 93% of people said that they were either mostly or very satisfied with the way that the program worked for them. And by time 3, it was 94% of people who reported that. And then virtually everybody said, I would recommend this program to somebody else, or I have, in fact, recommended the program to somebody else because it's worked for me. Very few people told us that the program didn't work for them. The people who did say the program didn't work for them were typically these more chronic breachers, and they, in many cases, actually took the responsibility on themselves and said, the program works really well, just not for me. It works great for everybody else, but I have other issues that I need to deal with. Participants recommended, obviously, better strategies to detect the breachers so we can try to get them at the door and not let them get into the casino. They recommended more outside marketing. Again, many of them first heard about the program because they were in the casino and they saw the literature there. But they said, if you had it on radio or TV, maybe my family would have known about it and maybe they would have recommended it to me sooner because they knew that I was struggling with gambling. So marketing outside of the casino was a recommendation. And then they also wanted some alternative re-enrollment options. In the first study, the only way to re-enroll in the program when your time was up was to go back to the casino and enroll. Or if you were around 2 of the different headquarters of BCLC, there's one in Victoria, I think, and one in Kamloops, maybe it's Richmond. There's 2 locations, they could go there. But for most people, geographically, it just didn't make sense. So they had to go back to the casino. And lo and behold, when they get there, they have full intentions of re-enrolling, but then the environment re-triggers the addiction. And so they go back and they gamble for a month or so before they re-enroll in the program. So we recommended having alternatives, and they actually introduced an option where you can now enroll via a counselor's office. And part of that strategy was to try to get more people to access counselors because you can re-enroll with them, but then maybe you'll also see that they're not these big scary people and that they can be very helpful for you. So people can now go to their counselor's office. They set some of them up with the iTrack system as well. And so they can update your photographs and they can fill in your information and they'll send it off to BCLC to complete the enrollment process. And so that is an option now for people to do. All right, so some of the key findings then. So near instant relief of the problem gambling symptoms, at least in the first 6 months, but we would hypothesize that it occurs a lot faster than that 6-month period. We need better connections to counseling. We need better reasons, better motivations. Maybe, again, the opt-out method will encourage more people to give counseling a try. Once they try it, for the most part, they're going to stick with it because they find that it actually is helpful. We also suggested more online options because that's not an option in BC, but it's something that they're working on. Multi-venue exclusion is important because of the number of people who said if I didn't get in here or if I didn't want to be detected here, I just went down the road and went to another site. That was an easy strategy for many of them to try to get around the program. Some of them would be caught anyways because of the eye-track system. Even if they show up at a casino, in a different part of the province, they're still part of the program and they're still going to, if they're matched on the facial recognition, security is still going to get an alert that there is a person here from the program that you should be on the lookout for. We found this out first in the first study, and it was reinforced in the second study. It's the importance of this psychological barrier. When we talked to people who had breached and were caught the first time, they said, I was caught, I never tried it again, because I knew the likelihood of me being caught was actually quite high. Whereas when we talk to people who said the first time that they went and they got in, that removes that psychological barrier. Now they know that there's a chance that they can get back into the casino, and so it removes, there's that motivation then to get back in again, to try repeating the breaching over and over again. So it's really important that that psychological barrier be enforced at the first time that they try to enroll, and that means increasing the methods of detection. And one of the ways that we recommended that happen, both the participants and our recommendation, was to do identity checks. We know that there are many difficulties around that, but we suggested a pilot might be an option. Just to conclude around the counseling, so low rates of access again, so there still needs to be more done there. We recommended that more GSAs be present in the enrollments. At the time of the second study, there was only a handful of GSAs around the province, and they weren't there on a 24/7 basis. They weren't there overnight, which is when a lot of enrollments are happening. So we recommended that they should do longer shifts, and that you should look at your enrollment history to find out when are we seeing peaks in enrollment happening at these different locations, and then staff accordingly. Have the GSAs be on site when you know your peak enrollments are likely to happen, and then they can be there and they can encourage the counseling uptake because there are beneficial outcomes associated, especially when you're talking about mental health outcomes. So the people who are experiencing challenges with depression, anxiety, not a lot of people had substance use issues, but again, these are all things that they can work through with a counselor and have greater overall success in the program. So I'm just going to go over the recommendations that we have. They're listed as well, point form, in the executive summary. So we had 3 broad thematic areas where we made recommendations. The first was on increasing enrollment. So again, BCLC was recruiting about 5% of people who could benefit from the program. It's already a large number of people, but they could definitely be doing the program with more people. So one of the things we suggested is because one of the challenges or the barriers for not enrolling in the program is because people didn't know, or they weren't aware, or they didn't want to realize the extent of their problems with gambling. So what we suggested is use just a very brief problem gambling screen. There are some out there that only have about 3 questions or so. Put it on the website, put it in the responsible gaming booths, give it to GameSense advisors, have it accessible for people so that they can take home, or they can do there if they want, a very quick screen to see where they're at in terms of problem gambling symptoms. And then if they score in the range where, moderate or high levels, connect with them around the VSE, give them a package of information that they can take so they know that this program is the right program for them. Again, external marketing, so we've already talked about where that might happen, radio, TV, and whatnot, but we also suggested take some of the findings from the research and use that to market the program. You can have a person talk about how they use it for budgeting, or you can have a person say, I did this program for 6 months and it changed my life, because 6 months is really all it takes when you see the effect on the problem gambling symptom scores going down in that first 6 months. So we suggested just market it as in, give it a try. Give it a try. What's 6 months of your life, right? Just give it a try. See if it works for you. We also suggested that one of the concerns people had was about the privacy of the enrollment. If they're doing it in the casino, they notify security staff typically, or a GameSense advisor. They're taken into a back room where the enrollment happens, and then they're escorted out of the casino. Now we're told that when they walk out, security walks behind them, so it's not super obvious what's just happened. But they still felt like their friends were watching them, the other gamblers were watching them. Everybody knows I just signed up. Everybody knows I'm a problem gambler. And so that deterred some of them because they felt ashamed. It took them longer to sign up than it should have because they didn't want to go through that moment of potential embarrassment. Now, we know that at some of the sites across British Columbia, there are ways that you can sign up in the room, and then there's an exit right out to the parking lot. And so we suggested that BCLC take a look at all the enrollment rooms across the province, get a sense of how many of these have a direct exit out, and then try to help the casinos in making more of these rooms available for people. So whether it's moving things around, whether it's actually building something in there, make it possible for people to do the enrollment and then exit directly out into the parking lots. And that will help a lot of the psychological barriers that people have to signing up. Obviously, a second major theme was trying to prevent people from violating or breaching their agreements. So we did recommend that they pilot a mandatory ID check. There is obviously a lot of resistance to this, not from BCLC, but from the general population of gamblers. So people who go to the casino just for a fun night, they don't want to have to be presenting their identity. They don't. In some cases, they find it's a hassle. In other cases, there's this feeling of big brother. Why are you scanning my ID? Are you keeping track of me? Keeping track of the fact that I'm here? Now, we drew parallels to the ALPR research because we've done that research work before. And we know that when you're being scanned in your license plate, that information is not being retained. It's actually dumped out of the system if there's not a hit. And so we made the same argument here. Scan the ID. If it's not a hit to a person who's excluded or who is banned from the casino, then your information is not retained. We don't know that you were here on Saturday night. Only if there's an actual hit. And so obviously that's something BCLC is on board with, but they need to market it to people so that they understand and so it doesn't deter people from going to the casinos any longer. So we suggested just try marketing or try piloting it. Let's see how it works. Let's see how the public reacts. Let's see if it increases the number of people that are being caught violating the program. We also suggested that BCLC should put out a memo to be on the lookout to security staff when people are likely to violate. So one of the things we found is that regardless of whether you signed up for 6 months or 3 years, most people told us that they first tried to breach their agreement towards the end of the first 6 months of being excluded. Maybe they forgot that they were signed up for 6 months or longer. Maybe they forgot when the exclusion was happening, or they were starting to settle into other parts of their life and maybe gambling was starting to trickle back in. We don't know those motivations yet, but what we did say is that this is what people are telling us, so why not make it easier on security and send out a memo to everybody at about the 5-month mark of their enrollment saying, hey, this person signed up 5 months ago, just be on the lookout for them because they're now in the period of time when people are at a higher risk of violating. So that might help security know who to be on the lookout for. We also suggested, in the first study, we suggested these chronic violators who are placing excessive demands on the program, we suggested just take them out of the program. They're not the right fit for the program, and it's becoming resource heavy for people to enforce this. That was not a popular suggestion, so BCLC did not accept that. So what we have said in our second study is, okay, let's try a sliding penalty scale. First couple of times that you're caught breaching the program, let's take you back to the office, let's remind you of when your exclusion expires, let's give you another package of information, let's recommend counseling again, let's connect you with a game sense advisor who can help you and mentor you through this process. But then if you continue to breach, if you go beyond that level, now let's actually start wrapping some services around you. Let's say, you know what, we're going to move you to the program where you have to do counseling before you come back in because you've demonstrated to us that you can't control yourself, that the program is not helping you to control yourself. You need more support than what the program can give. So start adding on more of these requirements for people to have to pass through in order to come back officially into the casino again. Because these are probably the people that would benefit the most from counseling. And so just getting them in the door that way might help. We also said evaluate facial recognition. We know that there are a lot of challenges with how this program operates, and BCLC is actually undertaking an evaluation of that now to see how well does it work and how can we maybe improve the way that it works to catch more, again, banned patrons as well as people who are self-excluded. Then the third theme was about connecting more with counseling. So how can we get people to agree to have their name put forward? How can we get people to agree to actually go to counseling? The opt-out idea came up after this report, so it's not in here, but again, it's something that we're thinking of doing a pilot with. So we'll take people from a couple of locations across the province, we will opt them in automatically to counseling, and then make them opt out, and we'll see if that increases the uptake on counseling as we go forward. Other ideas, though, were to incentivize uptake. So as part of the marketing of the counseling, maybe BCLC can incentivize it and say, hey, if you go and you complete counseling and your counselor agrees, we will shorten your exclusion. So if you sign up for 3 years and you go do counseling and a year in, you've got everything under control, you've got some strategies for responsible gambling, we will shorten your exclusion to allow you to come back into the casino. We also said just straight up pay them. If they go to X number of sessions, give them a gift card for a restaurant or something like that. Incentivize it somehow. Because part of the challenge for people not taking counseling, from what they're telling us, is, again, they don't have the time, or they're worried about how it's going to impact them, what people are going to think if they find out that they're taking counseling. But getting them in the door and starting that conversation, for a lot of people, that's the step that they needed. And then they connect with a counselor and they remain in the program. We also suggested more online options for people, especially in our northern communities where people don't have easy access to counselors, being able to access counseling online or even a support network online. We've also suggested an app that people can have where you can connect to people online and you can talk about the issues that you're experiencing with problem gambling and work through your counseling options that way. And so that's something that GPEB in BC is looking at doing right now. That's the Gaming Policy Enforcement Branch. Marketing the counseling more effectively as well, letting people know about the impacts that counseling can have on your success in the program. So talk about some of the stories of people who've said counseling worked really well for me. Really get into that personal marketing of it. And then use the game sense advisors more often during the enrollment. So at the second study that we did, they were only present in about a third of the enrollments. BCLC has actually now taken control of this program. It used to fall under GPEB. It's now a BCLC program. So they're increasing the number of game sense advisors, and they're spreading them out more widely across the province, and they're making them work more around the clock so that they are there when the person needs them to be there. So just to conclude then, what works? It seems like the enrollment methods that are currently happening are meeting the satisfaction levels of people enrolling in the program. They feel incredibly supported. They feel respected. They don't feel ashamed when they're in that room with security or with game sense advisors. They feel like they're actually, it's funny, we took emotional scales before they enrolled and immediately after. We said, what were the different ways that you were feeling? And it is really instant relief. As soon as they've done that enrollment, they feel like a weight has been lifted off of their shoulders. So the enrollment is working the way that it is working. All we need to do now is get more people into the enrollment, more on the recruitment side. So security, the training that they receive, the appropriate response training, it helps them to be very non-judgmental. They're very open. They're very supportive to the person. They're not counselors, and they make sure that the person knows that, but they are supportive to the emotions that are happening in that room. GSAs add that level of support as well because they are more comfortable with the counseling side of things. They can provide that emotional support that security doesn't always feel comfortable providing. And then the jackpot rule. It is working it's reduced the violation rate from about a third in the first study down to about 22% in the current study. So that seems to be having a positive effect. What doesn't work? Detection. So still struggling with trying to find the best ways to detect people at the doors. Mandatory ID checks is the best way to do that, but is it best for the 75% of the population that gambles and doesn't have a problem? ALPR doesn't really seem to work yet because people have found very easy ways of, I'm going to drive my car and park it across the road, or I'm going to take transit, or I'm going to get a friend to drop me off. So they know the ALPR is there, and they just don't take their car. Facial recognition seems to have some challenges in terms of its effectiveness. It's obviously not catching everybody. And then requiring casino attendance to re-enroll doesn't work either because it re-triggers that desire to be back in the casino. So giving them other options is helpful. There are still some difficult questions that have been raised as a result of our gambling research. We've got some preliminary answers, we think, but some of these are more kind of moral, ethical questions. Should counseling be mandatory? We say no, it should not. We should market it better, market it more effectively, but you should not require people to do it because then it prevents them from getting into self-exclusion, and self-exclusion shows that it works. It helps reduce your symptoms, helps get them under control. Some people can successfully go back to gambling after that. Some people remain in the program for a lifetime. There's programs that require not counseling, but before you come back into the casino, you have to do some sort of responsible gaming education. It might be an online tutorial, it might be an online workshop, or you might have to come in and meet with somebody for a day of responsible gaming awareness. So that's another question about whether or not people should be going through this responsible gaming sort of training. It's not counseling, so it may not have the same deterrent effect, but the fact that you have to do something to prove that you're ready to come back in may still deter people from enrolling. So that's a question that research needs to answer. Should breachers be fined? Some people feel yes. The breachers think they should be, I can tell you that. But it's not really a positive aspect of the program to say, hey, there's a problem gambler here, they have a mental health condition, and we're gonna fine them for coming into the casino. So we need other better strategies to enforce that, and maybe the sliding scale is one of those. And then should chronic breachers be removed? As I mentioned, we recommended that in the first study. It wasn't very popular. It seemed like we were punishing them again, but we do need to do more for this small subset of the population that makes the program really difficult to enforce. So that's that. If you Google our center here, Center for Public Safety and Criminal Justice Research, you can find both of the reports as well as our other gambling research. There's a little link for gambling, so just click on that. I also have a bunch of my cards with my email address and my phone number, so I'm happy to distribute those in case you have any questions that weren't answered. And I think I also put it at the end of the executive summary as well, so you can reach me that way. Thank you. Questions? What's okay? It came back. Any questions?
Just a quick show of hands. Who here already uses iTrax?
Oh,
The mandatory ID check, that's regulatory from the PC.
So it's not in place yet. We've talked about doing a pilot study with a couple of different casinos across the, we'd like to do one in each region. So there's the lower mainland up north and then the islands. And so we've talked about piloting it in a few of those different districts, but there's been nothing that's changed in policy or practice around it yet. They only check if you look like you're underage, which NBC is 19. So most people don't get checked. Yes?
Tell me a little bit more about GSAs, where they come from, what the origin is, who pays them.
Sure. I'm just going to put myself over here. Yeah, thanks. So Game Sense Advisors, as I said, they did used to fall under the Gaming Policy and Enforcement branch. So these are the people that are looking at the counseling. They provide the counseling opportunities as well. So it was basically people who are hired and trained to be responsible gambling advisors. So they run different kind of games and activities in the casinos. They have kind of like a stall that they set up. People can come and learn about myths about gambling. They take them through kind of the mathematical probabilities of winning. And they're basically there as a resource for people if they have any questions about how can I gamble more effectively. It's not really what they tell them, but it's about how to gamble in a way that is responsible and safer. So they were paid for by GPEB, but they've now switched under control. This just happened about 2 months ago. BCLC has taken that program under its wings, and so they'll be providing the funding for it. I don't know where the funding comes from outside of, it's now BCLC. But yeah, and then they're going to expand the program across the province.
I may have missed this. Do they participate in the intake?
They do. So the GSAs, if they are on site, then they will be asked to participate in the enrollment. Yeah. And so that's part of their job, but usually security is still there because they both ask different pieces of information. Security asks, the background, the tombstone information, they take the pictures and whatnot, and then they hand it over to the GSAs who talk about the counseling aspects, and they talk about what happens if you breach. So it's kind of like a tag team approach to things. Security is trained to do it all on their own, and so are GSA, but it's usually done between both of them.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Any other questions?
What does this on-site sign up? I mean, is there how do people know that it's there? And you
For
said
which
it's
one,
like
sorry?
Just the self-exclusion, the DSC sign up.
Yeah.
How does that?
For the program rather than the study.
Yeah, and who gets the information and so on.
So from my understanding, when people are wanting to sign up for the program, they go usually to security. That's the way historically it's worked. But they can also go to a Game Sense advisor if they are located in that casino, and they can say, I need help. I want to sign up for the program. Maybe somebody's told them about it, or maybe they've seen the signage. So then they're taken into the back office in the casino. They sit down with either security, GSAs, or both. They go through the process, fill out all the paperwork. It goes electronically and to the headquarters, and it's then distributed out to all of the 17 casinos and the commercial gaming halls and everything.
Oh, okay.
So it's pushed out that way.
So it's not like somebody at home can sign up at their own computer at home. Okay.
They're looking at trying to increase those options though, but some of the problems were making sure it was me that's signing up and not my husband signing me up, because they had some of, they did have some times where, for instance, if there's a language barrier, they had some instances where people came in with their partner and it turned out that their partner wanted them enrolled, but they did not understand what was happening, so they have to be really clear that it's you, that you're volunteering for this, and that you understand the program. So now the other options are you can go to your counselor's office, and your counselor, there's a set number of problem gambling counselors who work under the program, under GPEB. They are tied into the system as well, so they can sign up through them, and the information is again shared. I don't know in that case if it's shared immediately electronically or if they have to mail it in. I can find out for you though, if you wanted to know more about that. That's generally the way that it's done.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yes.
Has there been any look at positive reinforcement for not breaching, I guess?
Yeah.
Because it obviously worked with your study with the gift cards?
They have not looked at that. That's an interesting angle to take it from though, because we know from just general research, positive reinforcement tends to work better than negative reinforcement does. So no, they haven't looked at that, but that could be something where if you get to the end of your 3 years and you've not breached, for instance, you get some sort of an award. Yeah, I mean, the challenge would be, again, that they don't catch a lot of the breachers, so you could easily breach, not get caught, and then say that you've never breached, and it wouldn't really be the same. But yeah, that's interesting. They've never looked at that. Yeah. What would you suggest?
I was thinking more like along the way of reinforcing every month you don't show up, just send a letter saying, hey, saw that you weren't in the casino, great job. Just something to reinforce saying, we recognize you for doing a good job.
The policy prevents them currently from reaching out. Once you sign up, you're taken off of the mail out list, so you're not supposed to get any mail from BCLC, no marketing, because they don't want to re-trigger the desire to go back to the casino. So you could be.
Counseling.
Yeah, if it comes from counseling, for the 15% of people that are for counseling. But maybe that's a way to get them more into it again, is to incentivize going to counseling. So that's where the positive reinforcement would be kicking in. But I think just looking at the overall population, that might be something to work for the chronic breachers, but for the most part, people aren't trying to breach the program. You know, they're doing other forms of gambling and it seems to be okay, but they're not trying to breach. It's that smaller group of people that have all these other issues that are compounding the addiction that they're having the most struggle with. So if you can incentivize them to access counseling, that gets them to the first stage of trying to deal with those problems. Yeah, great idea.
I just have a question about that whole idea of, if they sign up, they exclude themselves from a casino or a video lottery facility or something like that, but you still allow them to play lottery or to play fantasy sports or something like that. I mean, isn't a gambling problem a gambling problem?
You would think so.
A gambling problem?
Yeah. But
so why would you? I mean, what is their thought process? They being the BCLC, that they would allow somebody to ban themselves from X but not Y.
I think it has a lot to do with the casino environment, because most of the people that we talk to are not gambling on horses. They're not playing Keno. I mean, some of them are, but for the most part, the addiction is tied back to the slots. And so once you remove the casino environment, then it doesn't seem to be having the same effect on their problem gambling symptoms. So they can safely do these other forms. We have, we didn't ask how much they spent on lotto, but we did ask, now that you've stopped doing casino-based gambling, what other activities are you drinking now? Are you doing online gaming more? Are you buying more lotto tickets? And we didn't find that there was any big spike in any other sort of replacement behavior. So I think it's just taking them out of that environment. And it'll be really interesting to see when we get to the online sample if the same kind of effects are happening, because it's not really the same environment per se, where you're surrounded by the noises and the darkness of the casino.
But it's basically the same offering though, because now you have slots, you have poker. I mean, there's a lot of online activities that are the same as being in any gambling environment.
Yeah, I think it's just because you can do it from your home in your pajamas.
Absolutely.
That's the different environment.
And that's convenience gaming. Right?
Exactly, exactly.
New form of convenience gaming. So.
Yeah, so this is uncharted territory for us to go into the online gaming. It's interesting to see that the land-based people we talk to, virtually none of them went online after. It's a different population of online gamers than it is the people that are in the land-based casinos. So that's one of the things we're going to be looking at going forward, is how does the program work differentially for them.
So, in looking at your demographics, you can, it's kind of skewed to me, because I see that in slots, it's always an older player that's always playing slots.
Yeah.
So if you're looking at, moving forward, I think younger people, that you're going to have that, I guess you're going to have the same amount of people that are having the problems inside a regular brick and mortar casino. They're going to have the same problems at home, because you have the same tools. Right. And those things are going to miss.
Yeah, I think that's why we didn't see a lot of online gamings, because it was an older population. I think it was around 40 or so, and so they just weren't comfortable with that. But probably the people that are online will be this younger population, so it'll be interesting to look at their success in the program and where they turn their behaviors. If they're online with playnow.com, it's very easy for them to just switch over to PokerStars or something like that, which is outside the control of the program. So we're not sure at all how well the program will work, but they need something. Yeah. So hopefully this will provide it. And it doesn't cost them really anything to administer, because it's just a click of a button, and it basically blocks your IP address, I believe.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about our research. And if you have any other follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to contact me. I'm always happy to talk about the gambling research that we do.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. McCormick.
You're welcome. Very for the rest as well.
Yeah, that would be great. So very valuable information, I think, for anyone working in voluntary self-exclusion, particularly, to us here in New York as we're having these discussions through the Responsible Play Partnership regularly. But for us in the council, we're constantly looking at ways that we can improve our programs, raise awareness. As Jim said, that's our main goal, is to ensure that problem gamblers and their families get services and have the assistance they need, and we certainly see voluntary self-exclusion as one of those resources. So we are doing some small things in the coming year to take a look at how we can do some of the things that Dr. McCormick recommended, which include increasing awareness of the program, and with that we know that then we're going to have folks hopefully self-excluding more, so we want to develop some educational resources for the folks that are going to be doing the self-exclusion to help that process hopefully have positive results that they're having a BCLC with those self-exclusion enrollment interviews. And we are going to also be taking a look, is it this one? There we go. At connecting folks again to counseling services, since we know that is an effective program as well. And Jen will be talking to you a little bit more later about what we have available for counseling here in New York State and how to connect with that in an effective way. So the first thing we're taking a look at doing this year, and it's conceptual at this point, is developing an educational video that can be used both by clinicians and the general public to take a look at how does self-exclusion in New York State work. So really, in the interview process that we're going to do for the demonstration video, we'll show how to do that through the care and concern model and demonstrate some of the things that are used in the training in British Columbia, so that we know that the individuals have those positive outcomes and the positive experience in the enrollment process. We're even exploring whether or not that might be a possibility to put that publicly, so folks who are remotely enrolling in self-exclusion may be able to access that video as an explanatory piece before they remotely send in their application. So again, just trying to provide support to everyone that may be involved in that self-exclusion enrollment interview. And as I said, it's conceptual at this point, so we really will be looking for feedback from the folks who might utilize it, and we'll be reaching out to facility staff as well as clinicians to find out what will be helpful to you and how would be best for you to utilize such a demonstration video. So none of this is mandatory, of course. It's meant to be a resource that we're developing to help support. So we really do want your feedback as to what would be useful to you. You know, if it's something you're going to use at a security pre-shift, how short or long does it need to be? If you're going to send your staff off, or you'd be willing to do that to watch the video later on, what can we give you to assist in getting them to the correct link? Things of that nature. So really practical, and we'll be reaching out for your support and feedback on that as well. The second thing that we're going to take a look at doing this year is increasing awareness just that the VSE program exists. I think folks still don't know when we talk to people who come into treatment or who have access resources through the council. Most people don't know that voluntary self-exclusion is an option to support them here in New York, and definitely don't know that it's a statewide program, and that is newer here for us. So we don't have, the ability to do a huge public awareness campaign right now, but we're going to start small using our current social media outlets, and we will develop some messaging in 3 areas. One, to let people know that the program exists. One, to let people know that it can be a support tool in their recovery process, and also to let them know that how they can access the online application or resources. And again, so the efforts that we're making this year are not just focused around the industry getting this messaging out, but about all of us getting the messaging out in the communities, through clinicians' offices, because we know folks are accessing VSE in different ways. Beyond social media, which as we're putting that messaging out, I know all of you have social media as part of your businesses. If you're interested, willing, and sharing those messages, we certainly do that already with OASIS and the Gaming Commission when we have campaigns, and it's been very effective in helping to get that message out more broadly. So we welcome the opportunity to share that with you as well. Secondarily, we'll be developing some sort of print or literature around self-exclusion, again, to explain how does it work, potentially add in a few of those screening questions right on the document itself to help people identify whether it might be a program that would work for them. POM card or RAC card, something of that nature that, again, clinicians can distribute to clients who may screen in office, or to family members who may report this is a source of anxiety and stress for them, that a spouse or family member may be involved in a gambling problem. And so we'll be sharing that with our clinicians. Again, welcome any feedback if you're willing as facilities to share that print material on site about what would prevent you from putting it out on the floor, or what would be helpful for you to have as you may be encountering repetitive issues as you're dealing with enrollment and folks who are in need of this kind of support. Lastly, in terms of connecting VSE patrons to treatment, these are small efforts this year, but in the past we have created this Know the Odds campaign. If you're not familiar with it, please go to the website. All of the resources were developed particularly for folks who are in need of support and services. So if you're not using it already, we have this little Know the Odds postcard. And on the back of it is all of the resources where you can generally reach out for help in New York State. And that's our New York State Helpline as well as Gamblers Anonymous. So I brought copies of that card with you today. I know several facilities are already giving that out at VSE, but it's, again, a small thing we're recommending that as you're giving the copy of the VSE form to the individual, that they get this card to take with them. While they may not be ready right at the time of enrollment, again, we heard from research that it's not always uptake immediately into counseling. Having this resource as they move forward, I think makes it more likely that we can connect them to services. So if you can start utilizing that card, please take these with you today. That is a small change, but one we think will be important in connecting folks. So we can't do this alone, obviously. I mean, starting with the individuals themselves being willing to participate in this program, working with the Gaming Commission, OASIS, and certainly the industry and the clinicians that are out there to help people. I think we have a chance of making these small changes into something positive for everyone here in New York. And it really, as we looked at it, because it's small changes, it's not mandatory, it's not a huge burden on any one element of the system. I think it really is a win-win for everyone. If we can ensure that those enrollment interviews are a positive have positive outcomes for the folks who are experiencing them, and we can increase utilization of those enrollments, and then connect the people that are enrolling to treatment, we're going to have less violators, people with improved mental health, people with improved lives, and improved lives for their families, their communities, and really that's a positive thing for all of us. We hear and know that you're all struggling with self-exclusion and violators and breaches, and so hopefully, again, if we can get those folks connected to treatment, we can help reduce that burden for you as well as for the families that are suffering. So. Look forward to working with everybody again in the future as we've continued to do. Please take cards as you leave if you don't already have them or haven't been using them. And I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer to talk a little bit more about the connection to treatment and what OASIS is working on.
You need to come up there. I sit right here. Does everybody hear me? I'm Jennifer Byrne for any of you who walked in later than when I introduced myself. I'm a coordinator of problem gambling services for the State of New York Office of Alcohol and Substance Abuse Services. It's estimated that over 200,000 adults in New York State are diagnosed or meet the criteria for problem gambling. Within OASIS, we see a small fraction of this population. We've been overseeing problem gambling services since 2005, and some of the challenges that we face are the lack of awareness of problem gambling and that services aren't available in every community. OASIS is in the process of expanding its capacity within our current system, as well as working with private practitioner network to expand that access. Across New York State, we have 21 outpatient treatment providers and 6 inpatient treatment centers that provide problem gambling services. Some of your communities may not have those available, but they are coming. We've trained, I don't know how many private practitioners, but over the last 2 years have been training private practitioners in the treatment of problem gambling to be able to fill some of those gaps in services across our state. Oasis's effort in this, Oasis's role in this effort is to connect the gaming venues with those resources within their communities, to make those connections to the providers, to foster those relationships. So as you have patrons who identify as having a problem or may potentially have a problem, you'll know who and where to refer them to. Again, right now in your communities there may not be somebody, but we are working to get those linkages, and we look forward to working with all of you to make those connections and help the people of New York who need these services. So I thank everybody for coming today. Weather-wise, it was iffy for a lot of people, so we appreciate you all being here. Thank you.
I want to thank everybody for being here today. I especially want to thank Dr. McCormick for making a long trip from Canada, providing the excellent presentation. I also want to thank Michelle and Jen for their remarks. Responsible play is an important part of the Commission's agenda and something I have been passionate about for many years prior to coming to the Gaming Commission. Our partnership with OASIS and the Council has been productive, and we will continue to work together on improving utilization of VSC in New York State and to assist those in connecting to support. I think these forums provide an excellent opportunity and provide critical data and information for us to consider in moving forward, making the program better than it is today. I also appreciate the stakeholders being here and participating in this forum. I know at our next Responsible Play Partnership meeting, this will be certainly one of the items that we will be discussing at length and what we can do and how we can make our program better. I also want to thank Carolyn for the excellent job of putting this together today. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for being here and drive home safely.